The skimmer came out of the cloud bank too fast, engine screaming against the thin dawn air. Cale Rurin stood at the threshold of his glass house, bare feet on warm stone, watching vapor peel off its belly in ragged streamers. No one had landed here in years. No one was supposed to. The board's message had been clear. A single assistant, a retirement gesture, nothing more. Enough to keep his house upright while his bones grew old. The hatch snapped open. A figure stepped down into the mist, skin the luminous orange of engineered stock, white hair loose around her shoulders. A copper-gold sash crossed her chest, knotted low at the ribs, and she moved with the careless swing of someone who had never asked permission to exist. She looked at him, eyes bright, and said one word as if it were fact. "Sarah?" Another shadow paused in the hatchway. Same height, same luminous skin, but softer, slower. She tested the stone with her toes as if it might not hold. A sheer wrap clung damp to her hips, one shoulder bare. Her voice was quieter when it came, like she had to confirm she was still allowed to speak. "Neva." Cale's jaw tightened. His pulse climbed without showing on his face. "There was supposed to be one." Sarah's smile sharpened. "We know." He let the silence stretch, waiting. The wind tugged at the mist, bent it sideways across the terrace. Neva's hands clasped in front of her thighs. The manifest listed one. "We rerouted the transport tag. The system didn't check further. You falsified clearance." His voice stayed level, as though stating the color of the sky. Sarah corrected him easily. "Redirected. We were surplus. No posts, no housing credit, no next assignment. Written off." She tilted her head, eyes steady. "We chose here." Cale's gaze flicked past him to the skimmer, already rising, its belly fans cutting away into cloud. No beacon handshake. No flag. If they had masked the signal, it meant precision. It meant intent. Why here? He asked. Sarah gestured toward the glass walls, the wide gorge falling away in mist and green shadow. "Because no one comes here unless you let them. And you don't let anyone." The accuracy stone. He had built 31 years of silence on that truth. Neva finally lifted her eyes. They were dark, wide-centered, steady despite her posture. "We want silence. And walls that won't move." Something loosened in his chest, not comfort but a cold edge of fear. Two unknowns inside a house built for one. Yet their words carried no performance. Only intent. He turned away before they could see his calculation, moving to the prep counter. The ritual steadied him. Ground furlan seed, hot water through the cone, bitter steam cutting sharp through the moss-sweet air. He poured 3 cups, slid 2 across the counter without looking up. "If you stay," he said, voice calm, "you stay on my terms. You're not property. You work if you live here. You leave if you want. I won't stop you." Sarah picked up her cup with a grin like she'd won something. "We don't want to be stopped." Neva accepted hers with both hands, careful as ceremony. "We don't want to be moved again." They drank in silence. The only sound was the low hiss of the vents, the faint tap of mist against glass. Cale watched them over the rim of his cup, expression unreadable, while inside his mind cut through probabilities, tracking logs, beacon sinks, grid flags. Nothing triggered yet. Either they were very good or very desperate. When the cups were empty, he set them aside and gestured down the corridor. East wing. 2 beds, heated floors. Shower vents cycle 10 minutes. "Take it." Neva straightened at once. "We'll maintain systems if you show us. Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight you rest." Sarah lingered as she passed him, eyes sliding up and down like she was measuring the weight of his rules. "You don't ask why there are 2. I don't ask questions I don't want answered the first day," Cale said. Her smile widened as she disappeared into the hall. Their voices faded into the soft hum of the greenhouse corridors. Kale stayed by the door, scanning the horizon. A cloud bank sat lower than it should this early, building in the wrong quadrant. Pressure on the wrist graph ticked down, faint but steady. A front coming where no front should be. He rinsed the cups, dried his hands on his shirt hem, and crossed to the console. Fingers moved with practiced precision, lock terrace anchors, seal external vents, retract biolamps. Amber storm lights bled through the corridors. The house groaned once, deep in its glass bones. A pane ticked sharply above, a sound like ice cracking on a river. Cale's head lifted, jaw set. Storm protocol, he said aloud to the empty atrium. Now, the wind rose before sunset, thin at first, a faint breath pushing under the glass panels, then sharp enough to rattle the canopy struts until they groaned like an old hull under strain. Cale stood at the main console, jaw locked, watching the pressure line dip. Faster than predicted. He switched the house systems to full storm protocol, then sealed. Biolamps pulled into their armored housings. Lights dimmed to steady amber. The east terrace door banged open, and the two women hurried in. Hair whipped wild, skin slick with mist. Sarah tossed a coil bag, down like she'd just finished climbing for sport. Grinned sharp as if danger itself was a joke meant for her. Neva hovered behind, eyes darting to the glass walls, shoulders tight. "It's here, isn't it?" Sarah said, tugging her copper sash tight. "Not full strength yet," Cale answered. "But it's moving fast." Neva's voice was careful. "How bad?" "Bad enough to break seals if we don't prep." He didn't waste words. He led them into the storage bay, where the air smelled of cold metal and sealant. Harnesses first. Braces next. Terrace seals last. Move. Sarah slipped into the harness like it was part of her skin, laughing under her breath as she bounded up the frame lines, legs wrapping around rails while wind buffeted her from below. Neva stayed ground level, methodical, checking every latch twice, her lips moving soundless as she counted. Cale moved between them, steady hands, sharp voice. Clip lower. Torque with both hands. Keep your center low. He never let either get too close to an exposed edge. Halfway through sealing the ceiling terrace, the storm struck in full. Wind slammed against the glass like a solid wall. The entire floor trembled. Sarah let out a bark of laughter, gripping the frame tight. Neva flinched and pressed herself into a beam until it steadied. "Stay locked in," Cale shouted over the roar. "No sudden shifts. Keep your weight low." Rain came next, horizontal sheets hammering the glass until the outside blurred into gray water and fractured light. A sharp crack split overhead. Cale snapped his head up. One of the upper panels had fractured. Before he could shout, a shard blew free, slicing down. Sarah ducked too late. The edge nicked her shoulder, blood bright against her skin. She swore and clutched the cut. Inside. Cale barked. He was already at her side, unclipping her harness in two swift motions, dragging her back from the rail. She gritted her teeth, but didn't resist. Neva moved in to steady the frames until Cale shoved the inner door shut. The roar dulled to a low thrum. He crouched, peeling Sarah's hand away from the wound. Blood streaked down her elbow, but the cut was clean. His voice dropped back to calm, controlled. "Hold still." "It's nothing," Sarah muttered, though her breath hissed. "Stay still anyway." He reached for the med kit. Neva was already moving, dropping beside him, snapping the case open, pressing gauze into his hand without needing to be told. Her fingers only shook when they paused. Cale cleaned the cut with precise motions, sealed it with a gold strip, wrapped it in thermal gauze. His shoulders remained taut, but his hands never faltered. Sarah's sharp grin faded as she watched him. Her voice came lower. "You always this calm in storms?" "Yes." He didn't look up. It helps. You weren't afraid? I can be afraid, he said, and still do what's needed. Neva's breathing slowed at that, her gaze fixed on his hands. Cale finished the wrap and straightened. You did well, he said simply. Sarah blinked, as though she hadn't expected praise. Neva parted her lips as if she wanted to say the same, but hadn't dared. The house shuddered then, a deep groan rolling through the frame. Cale looked up, reading the ceiling like sky. Core chamber, he ordered. Neither argued. They followed him down the narrow stair, through reinforced doors, into the sealed chamber below. Warm thermal stone glowed underfoot. Steam curled from their damp hair and clothes. They stood close without meaning to, breathing hard not from work, but from the sudden stillness. Cale stayed a step back, watching them, listening to their breathing, counting beats. They were both shaking, but no longer from fear. Adrenaline leached away, leaving something rawer behind. Sarah met his eyes first, voice quieter than usual. You pulled me out like I weighed nothing. You were bleeding, he said. Nothing more. I didn't think anyone would care that fast. Neva's voice was a whisper. I thought if one of us failed, the other would have to choose. That's how it's always been. Not here, Cale said, tone even but softer than before. Here, we keep each other standing. For the first time since they had arrived, both women went still, as if trying to decide whether they could believe him. He let the silence hold, steady as the stone beneath their feet. Above them, the storm hammered at the glass house, a living thing trying to get in. Inside, for the first time, they stayed still together. Morning came sharp and silver. The canyon rim steamed where cold rain had kissed warm stone. Cale had not slept. He sat cross-legged against the pressure gauge, eyes fixed on its steady climb. When the line finally ticked upward, he let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. The house had survived. More importantly, so had they. Sarah stirred first. She uncurled on the thermal floor, copper sash twisted across her ribs, white hair stuck in wild strands against flushed skin. She blinked at him, unfocused, then sharper. You didn't sleep. Didn't trust the frame to stop shaking. You trust it now? She asked. I trust us, Cale said simply. Her mouth curved, not her usual grin, but something smaller, softer. She pushed herself upright, wincing as her shoulder pulled under the bandage. He caught it instantly. Pain only if I breathe, she said quickly. So yes. Don't push it today. His tone carried no debate. Neva woke to their voices, slow, blinking at the light. She rubbed her eyes, then froze when she saw him still seated, still watching them. You stayed awake. Someone had to. You didn't have to, she said quietly, like testing Forbidden's words. He didn't answer. He stood and keyed the chamber door. Seals released with a hiss. Come on. Let's see what's left. The air outside was clean, almost too clean. Ozone and moss tangled on the breeze. Glass panels streaked with condensation, every seam intact. The terrace was scattered with ripped leaf mats, broken branches, and one cracked bowling shell. But the house had held. Sarah let out a low whistle. We didn't die. That's the standard here, Cale said. Her grin flickered. Neva crouched by a brace, fingertips tracing the mount. No fractures. It flexed to spec. She sounded almost proud, though her voice stayed cautious. You helped keep it that way, Cale said. Both of you did. Neva blinked at him as if the words were a language she wasn't fluent in. Then she gave the smallest nod. Sarah's smile widened, not mocking this time. Cleanup took hours. Sarah hauled debris with easy strength, laughing once when a branch smacked her thigh. Neva reset humidity cycles, lips moving as she read, code strings aloud. Cale moved constantly, tightening bolt heads, clearing drains, checking green bands on his wrist pad. By full sun, the house gleamed again, as if nothing had touched it. They gathered at the terrace rail, sweat cooling on their skin. Mist curled off the canyon like smoke. Cale checked his pad one last time. Storm cycle complete. We're stable. Sarah leaned on the railing, eyes bright. So we did it. Yes, Cale said. You did. It was the first time he'd spoken it without condition. Both women shifted at the weight of it, Sarah's grin slipping smaller, more private, Neva's shoulders easing like a knot uncoiled. Inside, the air smelled of baked veran root and bitter Furlan coffee. They ate in silence, exhaustion heavy. Halfway through, Sarah looked up, expression unreadable. Why us? You could have sent us away that first night. Cale set down his cup, met their eyes one by one. Because you showed up after surviving a system designed to erase you. And because you didn't ask for comfort. You asked for work. They said nothing for a long moment. Sarah leaned back, stretching out along the bench, eyes half shut. Neva sat straight, but her gaze had softened, no longer guarded. Cale let himself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since the storm began. The house stood. They stood. And maybe, for the first time in decades, he wasn't standing alone. That evening, when the sun bled gold across the canyon, Cale placed 2 small discs of brush steel on the counter. They clinked softly in the warm quiet. Sarah straightened. Neva froze. Key tabs, Cale said. Linked to the core. Full access. If you take one, this house becomes yours as much as mine. If you don't, you'll walk away and it won't stop you. Neva's fingers tightened on her datapad. Sarah picked up a tab, spun it once between her fingers, then set it back down with a decisive click. Smells like a greenhouse, and you're infuriatingly calm, she said, grinning. I like it. She looked at Neva. Your turn? Neva hesitated longer, then placed her datapad aside. She lifted the second tab with deliberate care, closed her fingers around it, and let out a long breath. Cale studied them both. No doubt, no hesitation now. Then it's decided, he said. Outside, a new wind stirred faintly against the glass. High above, a glint of metal cut briefly through cloud, gone as soon as he caught it. A drone, or just sunlight on vapor. He couldn't be sure. He keyed the terrace locks tighter anyway. Pulse steady, voice calm. Storms are never done here. But when he looked back at them, sitting with his key tabs in their hands, the house felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The sky sharpened after the storm, blue cut with pale streaks of cloud sliding low across the canyon. By afternoon, the house had settled into its normal hum vents sighing steady, biolamps sliding open again, mist drifting down over the canopy chambers like faint breath. Cale moved through the atrium with the slow rhythm of habit, but his eyes kept flicking to the pressure graphs. The line was holding, but he didn't trust the silence. It rarely lasted on Vidya 7. Sarah clambered up the east frame, her copper sash tied loose at the hips, body moving as if she belonged in high wind. She checked bolts, laughed once when the harness tugged her sideways. Feels like climbing a ship's rigging, she called down. Keep your stance low, Cale answered, not looking away from the gauge. And lock each brace before you shift. Neva knelt by the console, datapad balanced on her knees. Her fingers traced over schematics with quiet precision, lips moving soundlessly. She had asked for access to the weather archives that morning. Cale had granted it with a wary nod. Now she frowned, scrolling faster. These aren't right. Cale stepped closer. Show me. She pointed to a block of storm data, pressure drop rates compared to front arrival times. Your local logs say the last cycle built over 3 days. Corporate bulletin tagged it at 7. That's not delay, it's falsification. He stared at the discrepancy, jaw tightening. The past rose sharp in his chest. The day they told him to sign off on maps rushed for speed, not accuracy. The day he walked away before the ink was on his hands. They wanted clean numbers, he said quietly. People died for it. Sarah dropped down from the frame, hair wild from the wind, skin gleaming with sweat. And you left instead of faking signatures. Her grin was quick, but not mocking. Guess they didn't think you'd notice the difference. Cale didn't answer. He turned back to Neva's pad. You think it was just the last storm? She shook her head. I checked back a year. Half the data scrub it. He studied her, noting the precision in her voice, the intent concentration. Not fear-calculation. Sarah leaned against the rail, eyes on the canyon. What if it wasn't natural? What if they're steering the weather out here? Cale almost told her not to be reckless with words. Then he thought about the hairline crack Sarah had found on the upper brace that morning. Too clean, too linear for stress alone. He looked back at the graphs, the false reports. The idea didn't feel reckless. It felt probable. Neva scrolled again, jaw tightening. There's a subroutine buried in the house core, locked behind triple encryption. Show me. Cale leaned over her shoulder. The code scrolled fast, then froze on a phrase burned into the security kernel. Triad auth required. Sarah tilted her head, eyes bright. That sound like normal maintenance to you? Cale's stomach turned cold. Triad authorization 2, matched biometric keys, +1 legacy authority. Not an accident. A design. He looked from Neva to Sarah. Identical genomes, different demeanor. Two halves of something not meant to be separate. And him 31 years as a Maybright, the only survivor of a network no longer trusted. The air shifted around them, a whisper through the vents that carried no mist. He glanced back to the console. The pressure line dipped, sharp and sudden. Front's building offshore, he said, voice low. Velocity's too precise. Neva's breath caught. They seeded it. Sarah pushed away from the rail, fearless grin sharpening. Then we cut the line before it gets here. Cale didn't move. He watched the graphs, watched the two of them standing side by side, reckless fire, in methodical ice, and felt the weight of the choice settle against his ribs. This wasn't random. This wasn't weather. It was a hand closing over their canyon, and his house was caught in its fist. The glass groaned once, faint but real. Cale's jaw locked. Storm's coming. Faster than it should. Get ready, neither woman argued. Sarah's grin only widened. Neva's fingers flew across the pad, already mapping the code like her life depended on it. Outside, the light bent hard across the canyon rim, sharp enough to sting the eyes. Cale watched it, shoulders squared, and knew the silence was over. The warning came not as a sound, but as a change in rhythm. The air shifted, pressure plunging so fast the console lights stuttered red. The house shivered in its frame. Cale's gut clenched even before the storm alarm screamed. The gale hit like a hammer. Wind slammed the glass hard enough to bow the terrace braces, rain sheeting sideways in white torrents. The canyon below vanished into gray. Cale braced himself against the console, voice cutting over the roar. Full lockdown. Harnesses on move. Sarah was already strapping in. Wild hair plastered across her face. Grin stretched wide, like she was daring the wind to do worse. She clipped onto the overhead rails and hauled the first brace rod into position, muscles straining as the gale shoved at her. Neva didn't waste emotion. She darted between consoles, locking vent cycles, tightening seal protocols, her lips moving fast as she recited diagnostic codes under her breath. Pressure drop at 20%. Canopy loops red. East drain line failing. Cale pulled a brace into place himself. Torque lever groaning under his grip. Sarah, Hold the frame steady. Neva, reroute the drain before we drown in here. A sharp crack split overhead. A bolum shell fractured, half its casing tumbling down the terrace in a spray of shards. Sarah swore, leaning into the rail to jam the brace home. Rain burst through the gap until Neva slammed the mist cycle override and vented pressure out the opposite side. Keep her steady, Cale shouted, locking the final brace. This house holds if we do. For a moment, it did. The roar lessened, the frame flexed back into line, but the graphs on his wrist pad kept sliding red. The storm wasn't random. It had weight, direction, precision. Cale. Neva's voice was tight, urgent. She shoved her pad under his nose, screen blazing with locked code. It's not weather. It's override. The system is driving it straight at us. The words hit harder than the wind. Cale recognized the buried kernel. Triad auth required. The same command they'd uncovered the day before. Only now it wasn't dormant. It was alive, pushing the storm into the canyon like a blade into flesh. What does it want? Sarah shouted, bracing herself against the frame, teeth bared in the gale. Consent, Neva said. Her fingers flew over the pad, unlocking layer after layer. It needs 3 signatures. 2 matched operators us. 1 legacy may bright you. Cale felt the cold knot under his ribs twist tighter. They weren't here by accident. They had been delivered as living keys. The storm wasn't just a test. It was a purge. The glass house moaned deep in its bones. Sarah's harness jerked as the brace under her feet gave a sharp, splintering pop. She roared back at it, slammed her weight into the rod until it groaned back into place. Tell me what to do. She barked. Neva's eyes burned wide, pupils blown. We can override the purge, shift the grid to manual control. But it will only take if Cale declares intent. It wants his choice on record. Lightning flared across the canyon, white fire splitting the mist. The entire house trembled, a sound like an animal trying to shake them loose. Cale pressed his hand against the pad, rain slicking down his arm, and stared at the waiting prompt. Intent required. He thought of the maps he'd refused to sign, the bodies that had fallen because speed mattered more than truth. He thought of Sarah's blood bright on the terrace, Neva's quiet voice saying she didn't want to be moved again. His voice was steady, louder than the storm. No purge. No false signatures. Community control or nothing. The pad blinked green. The roar faltered. For a breath, the wind eased. Then it redoubled, smashing against the house with fresh fury, as if the system itself resisted being broken. Sarah bared her teeth, laughing like a fighter tasting blood. Guess it didn't like your answer. Cale gripped the brace lever, jaw set. Then we hold until it listens. The storm howled back, relentless. The glass walls shook. And deep in the house core, the locked code pulsed, waiting for the triad to finish what it had started. The house had taken storms before, but never one like this. The wind howled with a pattern measured, surgical like a machine playing at weather. Panels shivered in sequence. Pressure gauges swung red to the edge, and every seam screamed under stress. Cale drove the torque lever home on the last terrace brace, and knew it still wasn't enough. Inside, he shouted. Sarah hauled herself down the rail, copper sash plastered to her chest, sweat and rain streaking her face. She laughed breathlessly, wild with the fight. Neva followed fast, pad clutched against her chest, eyes sharp with terror and focus. Together they sealed the inner door, muting the gale to a low moan, the house trembling like a living creature under attack. Neva was already jabbing at her screen. I've traced it. The storm's not free. It's rooted through a subcore right under us. Cale froze. Beneath the house? Yes, her fingers blurred. They buried a weather control node in your foundation. It needs triad input to unlock. That's why we're here. Sarah ripped her harness off and threw it aside. Then let's crack it open before this place rips itself apart. They raced through the reinforced stairwells, down past the thermal vents, until the air grew damp and metallic. At the lowest door, Neva keyed in a string of codes she hadn't learned here. The panel hissed open onto a chamber none of them had seen before, walls alive with glowing veins of light, like roots of some buried organism. The hum was deep, a heartbeat of stone and steel. At the center, a console with 3 recessed plates. Triad auth required. Sarah whistled low. So that's what we were dragged across half a system for. Neva's voice was tight, urgent. We can stop the purge, but it demands all 3 inputs. Cale stepped closer, the glow painting his face. His gut twisted. You knew, he said quietly. Neva flinched. Sarah didn't. She squared her shoulders, chin high. We knew we were built for something. Paired genomes, complementary training. They said it was for resilience. Truth was, we were meant to merge back into one mind and run their storms. We broke protocol, Cale. We split their system and escaped. Neva's voice shook. If we go back in, if we merge, we lose ourselves. The console pulsed insistent. Wind boomed above, as though the sky itself hammered at the glass house. Cale's throat felt dry as dust. So the choice is merge into one operator, or... Neva's eyes lifted to his. For the first time, no compliance, just raw fear. Or we create a new state. A triad. 2 operators and 1 witness. You. It would break their control. It would make the grid public. Sarah stepped closer to him, rain dripping from her hair. But it only works if you choose it. It has to record your intent, bind you to us, permanently. Cale stared at the console, at their faces, one burning fierce, the other precise and trembling, and felt the weight of 31 years of maps and silence settle on him. He had walked away once. This time, walking away meant watching them erased. The chamber groaned, a bolt of light cracking through the veins in the walls. Above them, the storm wailed higher, glass shrieking against the wind. Cale set his hand on the central plate. His voice was iron. Then we do it together. No one disappears. Sarah placed her palm over the second plate without hesitation. Neva's hand shook as she lowered it to the third, but when it met the surface, her breath steadied. The console flared white. A rush of sound filled the chamber, not just wind, but voices, echoes, commands written in 100 tongues. The system tried to force them into alignment, to collapse Sarah and Neva back into one. Cale held firm, forcing his voice into the stream. We choose triad permanence. Distributed consent. Public law. No purge. The storm faltered above, its rhythm stuttering like a machine choking on its own commands. Sarah's teeth clenched, muscles taut, but she laughed through it, shoving back with every ounce of will. Neva gasped, whispering code like a prayer, locking pieces into place. The chamber's glow twisted, then realigned, 3 pulses sinking into one rhythm, different beats, but shared cadence. The walls shook, then stilled. Above, the gale broke like a torn sail, the roar dropping to silence so sudden it rang in their bones. The console dimmed. On its surface, 3 sigils burned faintly. Sarah, Neva, Cale. Equal, permanent. For a long breath, none of them moved. Then Sarah let out a ragged laugh and leaned her forehead against his shoulder. Neva sagged against his other side, trembling but alive. Cale wrapped an arm around each of them, steady, unshaken, even as his own pulse hammered. The purge was broken, but in its place, something larger had awakened, a system that now recognized them not as tools, but as its keepers. The storm was gone. But the world outside had changed forever. The morning after the gale smelled like metal and moss, sharp and raw. Mist drifted in slow ribbons across the canyon, curling through sun shafts that lit the glass house in clean silver. Cale stood barefoot at the terrace rail, mug of furlan seed coffee in his hand. His shoulders ached from holding tension all night, but the silence above him was real. No alarms, no hammering gusts. The storm was broken dot behind him. Soft footsteps padded over the stone. Sarah stretched into the light, copper sash tied loose across her ribs, hair damp from the showers. She inhaled deep, grinning crookedly. "It's too damn quiet." "I like it." Neva followed slower, slate-gray shirt rolled precise to her elbows, a pad tucked under one arm. Her eyes stayed on the panels overhead, tracking condensation streaks. "No fractures," she said softly. Frame flexed to design spec. Her voice carried something new. Pride. Cale nodded once. "That's because of you." Her gaze flicked to him, startled, then stayed. Sarah leaned against the railing, bumping his shoulder with hers. "So," she said, her grin broadening, "we saved your retirement shack. What now?" Cale didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 steel discs, setting them on the counter between them with a faint clink. "Key tabs. House core access. Full rights. If you take one, it's yours as much as mine." Sarah picked hers up without hesitation, spun it once between her fingers, then closed her hand around it. "Guess that makes this home." Neva's breath came tight. She set her pad aside, lifted the second disc with both hands, and held it as though it were too fragile to trust. Slowly, deliberately, she closed her fingers over it. A long breath escaped her, like something inside had unclenched for the first time in her life. Cale watched them both, the set of their shoulders, the certainty in their faces. The weight in his chest shifted. Then it's decided. They spent the day in rhythm that felt different. Now Sarah bracing Bolump shells with easy strength, laughing when the support arms jammed. Neva recalibrating mist cycles, muttering diagnostics under her breath. Cale moving between them, steady but not hovering. The house no longer echoed when he spoke. By dusk, the canyon burned gold. They ate on the terrace, shoulders pressed, knees brushing under the table. Sarah sprawled sideways, stealing bites from his plate. Neva leaned against his arm, eyes half closed from exhaustion that didn't carry fear. Cale didn't speak. He only listened to their breathing, to the hum of vents steady as a heartbeat. Then the sky split with a roar not of wind, but of engines. A skimmer dropped from the cloud bank, belly fans screaming, cutting low across the basalt terrace. Mist tore in sheets around it. Cale rose instantly, jaw tight, coffee forgotten. No one should be here. The hatch snapped down. A transmission ping flickered across his console, flagged with a board seal. Retirement step 3. Acknowledgement required. Sarah stood, sash snapping in the downdraft. What the hell is step 3? Neva's eyes widened at the data streaming onto her pad. It's a form. Old. It's your signature, Cale. You filed for one assistant. But this, she turned the screen. Metadata glared back at him. Not his timestamp. Not his channel. A ghost credential layered under his name. The message blinked again. Thank you for completing triad integration. Authorization chain preserved. Legacy operator verified. Cale's stomach went cold. He knew the header ID. Not a random board clerk. Not a machine. It was the call sign of the man who had trained him 30 years ago. The man who died in a mapping scandal when a false storm report killed 3. Cruz. His mentor. Alive or preserved inside the weather grid. The skimmer's hatch yawned wider, spilling light across the terrace. Sarah stiffened, fists clenched. Neva pressed closer to Cale. Breath shallow. Cale didn't move. He stared into that light, pulse steady despite the chill in his chest. If the ghost of his mentor had engineered all this Sarah, and Neva split as two, himself drawn here as witness, and nothing about their storm was chance, the system had not just delivered him companions. It had delivered him a choice. He spoke without looking away from the hatch. If this place belongs to us now, then so does whatever's inside that machine. But we'll bind it on our terms. Not theirs. Sarah's grin sharpened, fierce. Neva's fingers tightened around his sleeve. The skimmer engines wound down to a growl. A house hummed steady around them. The canyon wind was still. For the first time, Cale felt not like the last man at the end of a map, but the first of three holding a line the board could no longer control. The light in the hatch pulsed, waiting Dot, and Cale Ruran, retired Maprite, no longer alone, stepped forward to meet it.